Okay, does anybody see the record starting yet?
Yes.
Okay, my screen the way it is, it's hard to see. Okay. All right, well, welcome everybody to today's session. I hope that you're having a great day. Paul Fox and I are going to tag team this discussion. I'm going to begin discussing critical thinking, college thinking, and in chapter 7. Paul Arrington, would you or someone, here's the link to the textbook, and I was going to put it in the chat, but I failed to do so. Would one of you please put the link to the chapter, and that would really help me a lot. I hope you will chime in. Again, I was not utilizing Socrates or Plato's thoughts or ideas, or I was not inspired by them. This PowerPoint and my discussion today with you is basically strategies and just a time for us to get together and discuss ways that we can help students develop critical thinking. We are recording the session. It will be uploaded into on the YouTube channel for the UNIV faculty. It'll be there this afternoon. And all of the resources that I mentioned today and this PowerPoint, along with Paul's, will be uploaded to the Blackboard community. And again, I'm not going to talk to you guys specifically about what critical thinking is, because I would be preaching to the choir. You do understand that. Again, this is just to better equip us to help our students. So we have a diverse group of students that come to AUM with many different levels of knowledge and skills. Some of our students come underprepared. Some of them come very prepared. So part of the challenge is how to meet the needs of all of these students, because they're going to be in the same classes most times, maybe with the exception of bridge. So, and again, realizing that in order to build critical thinking, or for students to be able to think critically, they're going to need certain skills already, which they may or may not have. I just put a few here: communication, information literacy, other as far as interpersonal and collaborative skills. The great thing about UNIV, though, is that we give students the opportunity to learn about and practice these skills in the class. Of course, it's a 16-week course. We're really only in it for 15 weeks. We highlight and give an introduction to a lot of these topics. So while we don't spend a lot of time on each of these, I do think that it's very important that we do address each of these skills and help students to go ahead and at least start filling their toolkit so that they can take these and carry on with them when they start their second semester, when they move on to being a sophomore and so forth, hoping that they can be successful and graduate from AUM. So, and this is referencing the textbook as well. It's best to support students by, obviously, we're not going to teach them what to think. We're here to help them learn how to think. And so, as you can see from these two columns, on the left would be more of a professor that is a little more rigid, that's trying to impose telling students what to think. There's obviously more than one right answer most of the time, and that's arguable if it's a multiple choice, if you ask me, because I'm telling you, there's usually more than one answer. We don't want them just to regurgitate information. We don't want to just program them like machines. And we, as professors, don't want to give the impression that we know everything. We want students to be able to form their own knowledge. We want them to ask questions. We want to give them opportunities to practice in class. They need to process information. It's hard just to throw something at a student and say, okay, now you got it, great. Because sometimes they don't. It's important for us to guide them. It's also beneficial for students to hear from us and share our experiences. There are many times when, before I have honed in on some of my critical thinking skills, there are times when I've done better than others, but sharing my experiences with my students has really, really been helpful based on their feedback, because they can see us as real people and that we care and that they can learn from our experiences. Does anybody else have any stories they want to share? I mean, do y'all usually share in your classes with your students things about yourself? I don't mean you have to give all your personal information, but have you found it's helpful to connect with students that way? Okay.
I think it's helpful to, I know within the nursing to give real life, scenarios that have happened to yourself. And I've had students actually tell me, you know, Miss Baker, I was on this question and I remember the answer because I remembered you saying that so whatever it was. So yes, I found that to be very helpful to give them scenarios and things that have happened to you in your practice or from what you've experienced.
So glad you said that, because they made connections, and that's part of metacognition and part of the critical thinking process. So yes. Okay. So what do critical thinkers do? Well, this is just a list of some of the things that, some of the characteristics that we hope and the skills that we're hoping these students will gain. Again, we're planting the seed. We're giving them a chance to learn how to listen, become more self-aware, aware of their abilities and skills, and aware of the way they're thinking and how they view things, the way they ask questions. Do they ask questions? Do they challenge assumptions? Do they gather information? Some students, as I mentioned earlier, they don't know how. They'll go straight to something on Facebook or TikTok and there's their information. So again, we're hoping to help them we want them to consider multiple points of view to draw their own conclusions, and of course make those connections that are going to help them think more critically. How can we as UNIV instructors help students gain these skills and others like it?
I think you should make them aware of the why. Many times, why am I doing this? What's the rationale for this? Is this going to make this better? Is this going to help me to do this skill better, to do whatever I'm trying to, the end result? I think in making them understand the why, connecting the dots, then I feel like that they're able to critically think better. If you can make, you know, because you tell them so many things to do or how to view things, and you know, they go like, why? And I think if you help them to relate that helps. At least it has when I've had to do things.
I agree.
In a lot of my classes in the area I teach, but I think that's probably also applicable to some of what we teach in UNIV 1000, I always ask students to think about pro and cons on a given issue. So, you know, that they hear both sides, right? So that so they can engage in deliberation and reflection.
Thank you, Pia. Here are just a few of the ways I wrote down and thinking about myself of ways that I can help inspire student learning, critical thinking. Again, we try to get away from the paradigm of we're teaching, which we are, but trying to get more focused on we're trying to engage students in the learning process. So shifting from that, one way I think is to model. So model critical thinking as instructors. We have peer mentors, some of us in classes do. So letting peer mentors help students through the process, letting some of the students who have already, who can already think critically, or, you know, because some students have different abilities or you know, more advanced skills, and once you determine that, perhaps you can utilize them to help share with others or mentor others in the classroom. Being intentional and consistent, being purposeful in planning your classes, and also not just thinking about critical thinking during chapter 7, but purposefully trying to work on these skills throughout the entire semester. And of course, in UNIV, we promote interaction, students work in groups, sometimes in pairs. Ask open-ended questions that help students. And there are several activities I think we have in Blackboard too, as well as the open-ended questions to ask. I think Paul Arrington, Paul, weren't you telling me you had done this in your class?
Yeah, so we, yesterday we covered both, we did part of the class in this chapter 7 in college thinking, but also in information literacy. But what we really tried to do in class was talk about some real life issues with anything from I need to get advised and I'm not sure how that process works, and here's some roadblocks that come up. Or we even talked about in your career that you're going into, what are some examples of problem-based thinking or problem solving that you're going to have to do. And it was a really fruitful conversation yesterday with these. And we even used some fun ones like would you rather questions. And it was just a fun way to get them thinking about, I have two choices. I have to choose one because I told them no one's a fence sitter in this activity. And then just also get them to kind of walk me through their thinking. And then that also gave us a part, I think, with critical thinking. It's also important to talk about how you engage in a dialogue, because part of critical thinking is we may not all come to the same conclusion on something. So it gave us a chance to coach them through how do we have those conversations where you're talking about content rather than attacking a speaker.
That's awesome. Thank you. So yes, it's like Paul said, I mean, questions, real life problems, situations, and adding humor, activities and practice. This is something that I'm going to share with you today, or some strategies and activities that you can utilize in your classes, which will help inspire critical thinking. And also allowing time for reflection. You can utilize discussion in Blackboard. You could have them write a journal entry. There are many ways for reflection. You can pair students up. They could share with each other. You can have them write on a piece of paper, turn it in at the end of class. They don't have to put their name on it, and then you could bring it up in the next class. So there are many ways to allow students time to reflect on what they're learning. Okay, so some of you in this group, I know Dr. Clark will remember this. She may be the only one. I don't know if you were around here too, but in 2014, Lisa Kerr and Kim Brackett created and did a great presentation on metacognition. And by the way, that PowerPoint I am uploading into Blackboard as well. And in that PowerPoint, there was an activity, and this is the activity. And so I probably should have not told you to look yet, but I'm going to give you 30 seconds to look at this list. And if you've already done this before, just thank you for tolerating it and playing along. In 30 seconds, I want you to count as many vowels as you can. All right, so I'm going to count you down, and on your mark, get set. Oh, wait. Okay, go. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. How many did you count?
I got 54.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Let's see, putting anything in the chat. Okay. We got 50. Jason got 54. Okay, that's awesome. Okay, now what I'd like for you to do is to take 30 seconds and tell me and write down all the words you can remember. And go. 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. So how many words did you remember?
3.
All right, 3.
That's it.
All right, let's see, Lynn, 3. Anybody else? I see Jason. Okay. Now, let's go back and look at this list. As you look at this list, of course, when I asked you to count the vowels, were you focusing on the words per se, or you were just going through and looking at the letters, right? Okay, now that you see this list, do you see anything in this list that might help you remember? Or is there any way you can make any connections? Anything familiar, anything? I'll give you a few seconds. Okay.
There's some words with, or some phrases with numbers, so I might try to group those to help.
That's great. Okay, so let's just start. Dollar bill. What would that be?
That's 1.
Oh.
Dice is 2.
Dice would
tricycle.
be 2. Tricycle. And so on and so forth. So it's actually 1 through 15 if you take a look. 4-leaf clover, a hand for 5, 6-pack, and so on. Now, this is, I mean, obviously in life, if I wish that all the information we learned in college and in life was easily placed numerically, because it's something we're familiar with. But this is a fun activity, and the PowerPoint that I'll share with you also has a set of questions, walking students through a question for each of Bloom's taxonomy levels, and it's very engaging. So again, it just kind of shows students a way to make connections, and when you're able to connect things in a way that makes sense, then it's easier to take them in and then to utilize them. Did y'all think that was fun? Good. Okay. Here's another activity. It's not really an activity, but it's an assessment. I don't know how many of you might be familiar with this, but it's the Metacognitive Awareness Inventory. It was created by Schraw and Dennison in 1994, and it's designed for students to assess their general self-regulated learning skills. There's a scoring guide, and so again, this will be in Blackboard, but students will just take, it's got 52 questions, questions such as, I ask myself regularly if I'm meeting my goals. And then at the end, there's a scoring guide, and they can see where they fit in. And this kind of shows them what they're thinking about, what they're looking at. And it's okay. There's no reason that someone's supposed to be further along than another. It just shows where they are. And if you have students complete this and they turn it in, you can actually take a look at each of your students and see where they might be, where their strengths are, and then maybe focus a lesson, or maybe group work, or even meet one-on-one, or provide additional support. So again, this is something that you could utilize during, do critical thinking, college thinking. Another great resource is videos. And in the textbook in chapter 7, we have a great video in there that talks about critical thinking. I think it's about 5 minutes, just really good. Here's one of the videos that I use, and I also have a lesson plan that goes along with this. Do y'all recognize this, the escalator, stuck on the escalator? I've showed this. How many of you have not seen this? Okay, Heather, Lynn, have you seen this?
I think you showed it at the Learning Center years ago.
I did. It's awesome. It's worth showing again. It's 2 minutes, y'all. Watch this.
That's not good.
Oh, I don't need this. I'm already late.
Somebody will come. Anybody out there?
Do you have a phone?
No. Sorry. Somebody. Hello. There are 2 people stuck on an escalator, and we need help. Now, would somebody please do something?
I'm not going to make you watch the whole thing, but I think you get the point of how silly this is. And so it's a great discussion piece for critical thinking. And let's see what Jason has to say. Yes, quote, escalator temporary sort of inconvenience. Yes. And students find this hilarious, and it is funny. So it's a great, and YouTube has a lot of videos like this, the TED Talk, there's TED Ed. I don't know if you've ever used that, but there's some great videos, and then they come along with some discussion questions and dig deeper. And so those are, again, are some great things that you could utilize in your class. Chapter 7 is really not that long. You could pair it with another chapter. Paul Arrington paired it with information literacy, and it worked really well. Here's another video that I utilize, and it's, I'm not going to make you watch the whole thing. It's really short, but this gets students thinking. It's 10 years old, but still very meaningful. And y'all may have seen it. And to be cognizant of our time, I'm going to stop it there. But discussion with this video has to do with asking students, do they feel like the earth is too populated? Is, you know, or should we worry about our resources? And again, this is 10 years old, so I think some of it is still pretty close, but again, it's really a good activity. And again, my lesson plan is will be in Blackboard. So I wanted to show it to you. And then the last resource that I really want to share with you, how many of you have heard of Third World Farmer and done this? Okay, this is great. I'm just gonna click on this quickly so you can see it, and I'm going to show you this. Okay, Third World Farmer helps students think critically. They are placed, and once you go here, you have to scroll down and you can select a language. It's in English now. And it's a simulation. So it's like a third world country. So we're going to hit play. I'm just going to walk you through it. So you get to buy crops, and you have so much, you put them in your fields, but you have so much money. You've got a family. And then each year you go through this, and then it'll take you through a year, and it'll tell you where you are. So we play. Just, you'll see I have $50. I have one turn. So we have crops, there's livestock, there's tools. Here's some other things that we need. So we've got $50. Well, obviously, I mean, if we bought this shed, we would probably go bankrupt because we need some income. So you make choices. This is $20. Sorry, let me just do it real quick. This 7 corn. Let's see, let's do another one. And then let's buy this. And it shows you at the bottom what it's where shovels give small increase in crop yield. So where did it go? Oh, I have to click there. And then you go next. So here we go through the year. And then let's see if I got, yay. Okay, I have $67. But I've done this several times. And sometimes if, you know, you have to think and be strategic, and to start making money, you've got to start getting livestock, but you got to have the money. So how are you going to get there? And sometimes you need $1 extra, but you don't have it. And so do you just carry over that $5? But this is really a great activity that students can do. You can go in the computer lab and do it, and it's really helpful. There are some other activities too. I just put a couple here, but anyways, that's pretty much all I wanted to share with you. I know I went through it quickly because I want Paul to have time for his portion, but do you have any questions, or do you have anything you'd like to share with us about other ways that you engage students in critical thinking in the classroom or not in the classroom? I'd love to hear from you. Well, maybe you can use some of these strategies this coming semester, and let me know how they go. I thank you for listening, and I am going to stop sharing and turn it over to Paul Fox.
A year over, more than a year of this stuff, and I still mute myself. I am so done with Zoom. I've been doing every meeting face to face that I humanly possibly can for well, since I came back from my most recent health episode. Now let me just see if this will show you my PowerPoint. Can you all see it? Okay, it's showing up on my wrong screen. I'm having like horror flashbacks to recent presentations from other people. But anyway. So what I'm going to talk to you all about today is the test taking strategies and a little bit of some general study helps that I've incorporated in my UNIV class and even in my history class and trying to help students do better on their exams. Because I believe in academic integrity, I'm going to admit that most of what I'm about to show you is something Matt Kemp and I drew up about 5 years ago that I've been fiddling with every so often. As I have to present it. And as I look over it, apparently he and I were going through an office phase based on the memes and other graphics that we have. But anyway, what we're going to talk about in brief, I try to line this up a little bit with chapter 13. So for those of you who haven't taught UNIV before, you can go back to the textbook and kind of get an outline of some of what I'm doing here. So the first thing is to identify strategies for effective studying in college. One of the things our students don't understand when they first get here, even our very well-prepared students, is that learning in college is completely different. I mean, it's a lot about the stuff Amy talked about that we don't do. We're not in the regurgitation business. Even when you get certain types of exams, to do well, you are going to have to learn how to process the information. You're going to have to take stuff from a lecture, from what you're reading, from what you work on in groups, and put it into some sort of format that it makes sense to you, because ultimately what we want as faculty members is evidence that you know what you're talking about. Most of the time, I assume I know what I'm talking about. So if you quote me back to me, that really doesn't prove a whole lot. If you quote the book to me, it proves the book knows what it's talking about. We need you to actually get into the process and make the material your own. We'll talk about some strategies for test taking, getting yourself prepped for an exam, not just the learning itself, but how you're actually going to be able to put the material together and do something with it. We'll talk about the different types of tests you're going to encounter, our students are going to encounter in their time in college, and when we as faculty members, what we mean when we give them a particular assignment. What do we mean by short answer? Because I think when we say this, something like that, like students don't know what that actually means. Most of the time, my experience is that just kind of means grape shot facts versus some kind of well-formed, thoughtful answer that gives me meaningful content. But we'll talk about the different types of assessments that they have and what our students should expect to deliver in those formats. And then to deal with a very real problem that we see all the time, and that's text anxiety. I know people who teach in math and in the hard sciences where they have a lot more like quizzes and homeworks and stuff like that versus in history. They'll have students that do really well on their homework, and they'll do well on the homework throughout the semester. But every time they have to do an exam, all of a sudden the pressure escalates and everything completely falls apart. It's not that the student doesn't know the content. It's just that under that particular format, their ability to do something with it just collapses. But anyway, we'll move on here and talk just now about things that I like to tell my students going into a test. I don't care what type it is. whether we're dealing with multiple choice essays, short answers, identifications, or whatnot. But some basic calm down and do your prep work tips. The day of kind of stuff here. You are very rarely going to take a test in your life that is life or death, or the course of fate hangs in the balance. Relax. You will, in all likelihood, live to fight another day. Your loved ones will still be there waiting for you. This isn't going to change all that much. And if in fact you're in a situation where one exam is going to be make or break for you, you probably have been messing some stuff up along the way to get to this point. No one exam is fatal. So take everything in stride. Take that deep breath. Use what you know. Trust the process. I hate quoting Nick Saban, but trust, it's about the process. Trust the process. Trust in the process that got you to this moment, and just let it happen. Believe in yourself. Don't freak out, because there's nothing you can do about it now anyway. Take the time to read the directions. This is common sense for us. All right, it's common sense for us now. But even now, I find like when I'm in a hurry and I just want to get something over with, I start flying around the page. I'm looking for the immediate do this, do this. I mean, all the context is out the window. I just want something over. But when you're taking an exam, we have to remind our students that they've got their hour and 15 minutes or however long they have. Use it to their advantage. It's okay to be that student who makes the professor stay there in the classroom the extra 30 minutes after the second to last person has walked out of the door. So take your time, read your directions. When you're stuck, move on. Don't allow yourself to get stuck in a rut with one question where you're just staring at it habitually, waiting for a bolt of lightning to hit you. Make sure, and I'll talk a little bit about this later, you want to make sure everything gets a chance of being answered. Our students, sometimes they freak out when they don't know something. They leave it blank after they've stared at it for an inordinate amount of time and passed up the opportunity to do better on other stuff. With an exam, I remind my students, never leave points on the board. I can always find something redeemable in an answer. I can most of the time find something redeemable in an answer. Throw something out there, but then move on, because there's probably other stuff you can't answer and you don't want to run out of time. There's no shame in asking for clarification or asking for help. If I can give it, I'll give it. I think every faculty member is that way. If I can give you help without giving away an answer, I'm going to do it. If you don't understand how I asked the question, if you don't understand what a particular word means, if it's way too open-ended and you don't know where I'm going with it, if I can help, I'll help. Just remind students that they are allowed to ask for help. No one's going to think less of them for
Yeah,
doing
that doesn't work for online classes though, right?
Yes and no. Mostly no. Fair enough. I'll give you the one yes is that I always post my questions in advance. And so they've got a week and a half to ask me any questions they want to about my questions. Don't worry, it doesn't inflate my grades. They don't bother working on it ahead of time anyway. But for the handful that actually bother to read them, I get that week and a half where they can say, I don't know what this word means. Are you talking about this in reference to chapter 2 or chapter 3? So there is some opportunity. It depends on how you structure your online assessments. Don't let things distract you when you're taking your exam. I think one of the things with test prep, I remind my students, because I usually teach in the Goodwin 109, I'm sorry, Goodwin 111, that room's going to be freezing. There's nothing I can do about that. Maybe practice do a practice test or practice studying in a freezing room, so your brain is used to functioning with the material under those circumstances. It's like recreating test-like conditions. So when you're taking it, you've prepped for that. If you know the person next to you likes to click their pen like an obsessive compulsive, maybe when you're doing your prep work, find something to kind of make that ticking noise so that your brain doesn't freak out or start losing its train of thought when it happens in real time. And then always proofread your work. I mean, all of us, when we write, Lord knows I still do it. your head gets a train of thought, you start cranking stuff out, and you skip a very important word like not, which completely changes everything that you're trying to argue. Now, most of us are smart. We give our students a lot of credit when we're great. We know we can kind of figure out where it was going and supply with our imagination what they meant. But you don't want to do that too often. So leave yourself plenty of time to proofread your exam, whether it's an essay that you have to go over or the short answer, or even with your multiple choice to go back and make sure that you've actually answered everything that you set out to do. Nuts and bolts of actually the preparation, what I think our students need to be doing. If you don't give them the questions in advance, and I'm going to tell you, depending on your field, so I'm not telling anyone how to do their job. My attitude towards giving a history exam is this isn't Jeopardy. I'm not trying to stump them. I'm not looking for a momentary reaction, because at no point in their career, even if they become history teachers, are they going to have to all of a sudden recall 4 causes of the Civil War without any warning? Like, that never is going to happen. But if somewhere in their mind they can think about those things, I'm okay. I'm okay with that. But if you're not up to giving them questions or giving them study guide questions that kind of at least give them a ballpark where you're going with it, what I tell students is look in the textbook, because most times the textbook has sample questions in it for each chapter or in each subunit. Look at your notes. Are there points that the professor hit on seemingly an inordinate number of times? Use that to kind of figure out where his or her mind is and what that person thinks is important, and start arranging some questions around that information. You may not get the wording exact, but you know where a professor is going. You know the themes that kept coming up repeatedly. So you can get that information more readily stuck in your mind. If you get a study guide, and I hate the expression complete it, but seriously, if it's on the study guide, make sure you have working definitions on it. Again, I think all fields are a little different. I find in teaching history, and this sounds totally counterintuitive, and it really is counterintuitive to my students, it is easier to know everything than it is to know something. If you understand that everything is contextual and that everything connects to one another, what you wind up doing is creating a base of information that's very story-like. And if you forget a particular detail, but you kind of remember where in the narrative it is, you go back to where you know, and you just go forward from there, and all of a sudden you kind of stumble into it. You want to connect the material to the other material. That way you're not drawing as many blanks. If all you end up doing is memorizing a series of one-line definitions, either it's stuck or it didn't. But there's no way to help you out if it turns out to be the information where you swing and miss. When you take that study guide, figure out how all those terms work together, how all that information ties together, and that way you have multiple avenues to getting to that information. And depending, really the professor can ask it any number of ways, and you'll be far more comfortable knowing what he or she wants versus, again, the one thing I knew about Algonquin Indians is that they didn't like the Iroquois. Well, if that's not the question, you're out of luck. But if you've got a lot of context there that relates it to a lot of other things, you'll be in better shape. And I'm sorry, Algonquins are on my mind because Milwaukee won the NBA Finals last night. And as soon as they did that, the only thing that jumped in my mind was the Alice Cooper scene in Wayne's World, for those of you who remember it, when he's doing the concert. And he's like, actually, it's pronounced Milwaukee, which is Algonquin for the good land. So anyway, that's been on my mind for the last night. Engage the material, actively learn the material. Create flashcards, depending on whether it's appropriate for the subject to use to quiz yourself. Recording yourself going over your notes. That way you can listen to it when you're in your car, when you take a walk. You have more opportunities to get that information into your head. Familiarity is important. Create a study group with people in your class. Nobody knows everything. And especially if you're in a situation where you do get study guides and stuff like that, there's always something that you will have left out. And being able to pull intellectual resources with someone else, no doubt is going to be of help. Use the study aids the professor provides. I give a pretty detailed study guide, but other professors do other things. But whatever is available, if the professor cares enough to give it, it's probably going to be useful. And so you should take advantage of it. Put all those questions you drafted together into some type of practice test. Do it in those test-like conditions. Like I mentioned before, if you know the classroom's going to be freezing, create a practice test and take it in a freezing room. If you know there's going to be some kind of distracting noise, do your best to kind of have that going on too. I don't know if you have a roommate or something like that. If you know someone's gonna keep walking out to go to the bathroom and trip over you, have someone trip over you a half dozen times. But whatever you have to do to get your mind thinking in those test-like conditions, do it. Take away from the kind of the game day distractions. Now we'll talk a little bit more about things for the kind of specific types of exams that our students encounter and how they should prepare for, or really how they should take these type of exams. Multiple choice is still common. I try to get away from it myself because it's a swing and I mean, you either know it or you don't. There's no way to help a student out with partial credit or anything like that. And despite the fact it's in their academic best interest for me not to do it, they complain, so I keep bringing it back. I give the people what they want. But when they take their multiple choice exams, remind them to read the test items carefully. Read the entire question and read their options. Don't jump at the first one that makes sense. Read everything because there may be something better along the way. Work through the process of elimination. It does work. Strike out the wrong answers. If you know something is completely off the wall and crazy, kill it. Don't get creative with how you write when you're trying to fool a professor into making it, you're not sure if it's A or D, and you kind of, you make a weird looking A that could maybe be a D, or that C might close off in the end. If a student tries that with me, it's wrong. I know what they're up to. It's sneaky. Remind your students to be clear and consistent in how questions are being filled out. And for every time I've seen an answer go from wrong to right, I've seen it go 3 times from right to wrong. Don't change your answers unless you know what you're doing. Students should trust their guts. They didn't get that 11th hour bolt of lightning that told them it was right. And remind them to go with where their head is. Now, a multiple choice test, definitely guess. Absolutely fill in a bubble. I don't know why anyone would not fill in a guess. Now, I will say this, if you have international students, you really do probably have to drill this home a little bit more, because they're used to, if they get it wrong, they lose more. Like if they fill it in and it's wrong, they'll lose more points than if they left it blank and got no points for it, if that makes sense. For us, it tends to be, you either got it right or it doesn't matter. It all counts the same. It's all wrong. For international students, getting it wrong is worse than leaving it blank. There's actually like a reduction of points, not just an addition of points. And since no one here that I'm aware of actually operates under that system, remind your international students that there's no penalty for guessing wrong on a multiple choice test. I have an anecdote involving an Auburn athlete from several years ago, but I'm going to be conscious of time and leave that out on not guessing. Long and short of it, he had a bunch of other football players in the room. He didn't want them to think he was smart, so he'd always leave 10 questions on my test unanswered. So he'd always wind up with a high C. It drove me nuts, but I figured out what he was doing. He confessed to it later, but anyway. When you draw a blank, look for clues and other questions. A lot of the material is going to be self-referential. So there's no harm in looking forward or looking back and then trying to kind of piece some things together in a pinch. True false tests, they don't happen a whole lot, but go with the hunch. Remind your students, don't keep reading something over and over again until you come up with the opposite answer, because you always can, especially with a true false situation. You can keep reading so much into a word, you can make it whatever you want it to be. Read it as it's written and go with where your gut is on it. Don't look for answer patterns, and especially this is also true on multiple choice. Students will look at a test and they'll say, it doesn't make sense. B's been the answer for 5 straight questions. It can't be B again. Or he hasn't had an A in the last 15 questions. We're due. Don't look for patterns. We're not trying to spell out messages. We're not sending you a secret code. I generate all my stuff through a random question generator anyway, and I mix up the options. The machine does everything for me. I don't think the machine has any particular intelligence about it. But I'll tell you, our students will freak out if you give them a true-false test and 10 answers in a row are false. So remind them never to look for patterns. like most things in life, a pure accident of the universe. Do look at your terms carefully. Look for the dids and did nots, the do's and the dids, did not, didn't, always, never. Look for those words that kind of cast an absolute over the entire question. But the rest of the words, just read them. Don't, again, overanalyze it to turn it into something it really isn't, or something the professor's not actually trying to tell you. With multiple choice and true, false, and all that stuff, you can kind of guess your way through it, even if you're not entirely sure. It's tough to guess your way out of an essay. The essay is going to require a lot more work, and our students aren't maybe as process-oriented as they need to be to do well in this. So the tips I give them, first of all, is know the question. Read the question carefully and know what the professor is asking you to explain. Analyze it. Is the professor looking for an analysis? Is the professor looking for narrative and explanation? Are you being asked to do a comparison between two different ideas? Are you being asked to synthesize something based on what you've been given? There's all different types of, or all sorts of different things an essay can go towards. Read the question, analyze the question, and if the student doesn't know, don't be afraid to ask the professor what's actually trying to be accomplished with the question. Don't just start doing word salad by spitting out on the page whatever's in your head. Remind them that they should take their time, map out their ideas, turn it into an outline, and get some real structure into it. I show my students, I like word mapping. I've always liked word mapping. It's a great way of drawing, making sure your concepts start linking together. I show them some successful word maps or good word maps from former students based on my essay questions and how they drew out the connections, and then they turned it into an outline to make sure all their data was in the proper order. Because that really is the next step. Make sure everything's connected, but then make sure it's organized properly. Make sure it's going somewhere. Ask the faculty member how, or if there's a particular way things should be organized. I'm gonna tell you, I'm still a 5-paragraph essay guy. I don't care. Cool stuff. Thank you, Jason. I'm a 5-paragraph essay guy. That hasn't changed over the last 18 years. I show my students how to do the outline. It's all based on that kind of model. Shows them how to organize it according to that. But every fact, we all have our own style. Make sure your students know what that is. When they draw their outline, it can kind of match up with it. But they definitely need to have the organization, because jumping around is going to make it seem very disorganized and wind up not with the grade that they want, and it's going to frustrate the heck out of us. When in doubt, when you don't come up with a great thesis statement, which you still should have, it doesn't hurt to reflect the question somewhere in the opening statement. It at least gives you some sense of, gives the student a sense of momentum, an idea that they've reflected on what's being asked. But somewhere in that opening paragraph, they have to convey to us where this is going. Students do struggle with thesis statements. I find as a historian, using the word argue always throws them off. And I say, what your thesis statement needs to do is state an argument. And when they hear the word argument, they immediately think fight or something like that. I'm like, no, what you're doing is you're just laying out your proposition. You're telling me what you're trying to contend. The Civil War occurred for these following 3 reasons. I know it occurred for many more than 3 reasons, but you're picking the 3 that matter to you. And then what you're going to do is systematically tell me why each one of those reasons contributed to the Civil War and why I should consider them more important than the others. The thesis statement is important because it lets us know where it's going, and it kind of wraps everything up tightly. Students need to be reminded of this, and they need to be told that they need to do this early in the process. For those of us who still occasionally venture to use a blue book, which I've stopped. I mean, when I wrote this initially, I was still using blue books. I've given up on it for the reason next, to write legibly, they can't. And I can't read it, so it's out. But if you still have that issue, remind your students if they're getting a blue book, if it can't be read, it's probably wrong. So take your time and do it that way. And then, of course, do the proofreading again. We can supply with our imagination a lot of things that they probably meant, but we can't supply everything. Return to the office. Well, I think of these as the easiest questions on the face of the earth, and I love giving them because I think of them as easy. Students really struggle with short answer questions. They struggle with both parts, actually, the name short answer. Sometimes they ignore the short part and they write 9-sentence paragraphs. And then they struggle with the answer part in that they wrote 9 sentences. And I don't know what just happened there. It doesn't actually address anything in the prompt. The reminder for short answer is this: on topic and specific. Don't waste words. Don't go off topic. Select your information with intentionality and get it out there. Look to see if you're supposed to do some analyzing, but in a lot of cases, a short answer question is just an expanded identification. It's a more detailed identification. Make sure your data is short, it's specific, and it answers what's being asked of you.
I use these questions a lot. And you're right, it's difficult for students sometimes to know what to put in. I mean, I tell them in an instruction, you know, a paragraph, 4 to 5 sentences, but then some people give me like 4 3-word sentences, right? Because, and still don't get the answer. I give them an example in the study guide, what it should look like. I think that is the most helpful now.
I've done that too. I've started giving some pretty good examples on what I think a good short answer looks like from student writing, not my own. And some people really take, they take to it, but then it's that, like you were saying, they either take that short part really literally and give me a couple words, or they give me a lot of words that don't have an answer in it. It's just trying to get them that the short answer is a couple sentences. It's more than one. It's probably no more than 6, but somewhere in there, you've got to have intentional information that addresses the prompt. But yeah, giving examples to students and having students ask for examples. God bless them. I'm about to quote Nick Saban for the 2nd time in the day. You've already got no in your back pocket. So tell your students, and there's no harm in asking, having your student, if you're a student, ask the professor for an example. I'm going to give you an essay test. I'm going to give you a short answer test. What does that look like to you? Now, I can't give you that essay, or I can't give you those short answers. That's cheating. But I can give you something. I can give you something that approximates that. And I think most faculty members, again, are willing to help on this. And from the student perspective, all they can do is say no, and then you move on. So remind your students that they can ask for more guidance on this stuff. And if they get no, move on. Last type of exam, at least I'm really familiar with on my end of the book, or my end of things, is the identifications. As you give them that nice list of terms, you tell them, give them 15 terms, tell them to pick 10 and tell me why these things are significant. When this comes up, remind your students that not all information is important information. Not all information is significant. And we often tell students never to use Wikipedia because it's wrong. I actually don't find that to be the case. I say don't use Wikipedia because it's irrelevant. It's not that the information is false, it's that I don't care. And so if you go to Wikipedia to do your study guide or to get information about the historical figures, what you're likely to tell me is something that's absolutely irrelevant to the question. For example, if I asked you, identify Napoleon, you said he was born on an island and he was short. These are both true statements, but they're absolutely not relevant to our class. Tell me he personified the French Revolution. Love it. Conquered most of Europe. I can work with that. Sold the United States to the Louisiana Territory. Also very important. Cold Napoleon. God love the people of Louisiana. Fantastic. But from an island and was short, I've got nothing. But those are true. When you get those identifications, you just need to be specific, but make sure what you're saying is significant. Hit the very important highlights, make sure it actually matters. And finally, just to kind of tie this together for test taking overall. Test anxiety is a real thing for our students, and I see it gets worse semester in and semester out. What I try and tell them and hopefully keep in the back of their mind, first of all, don't overstudy. There's a point where you're going to reach a saturation point with your brain where it's not retaining anything anyway. So all you're doing is put every piece of information you put in, you're just kicking something else out. You know as much as you're ever going to know. So don't overdo it. Don't study up to the last minute. Don't be studying as you're walking into the class. You're really going to start kicking out good information for probably bad information, and you're likely to forget what you just learned at that last minute. It's just that you didn't have enough time to retain it. And so you threw out something you should have been retaining and didn't add anything in its place. I love helping students. There's nothing bothersome about getting a bunch of emails asking me about what's going to be on the exam, how can I prepare, define these terms and all that kind of stuff. Not a huge fan about getting those emails at 7 o'clock the morning of the exam. Then I kind of think your effort's not all there. So reminding students that they should ask their professor for help, but probably not do it the morning of. Show some initiative. A little initiative will also get you a little grace when things are being graded. And never be afraid to ask for us for help. All we can say is no. And most of us won't say no. We're an odd lot, I accept that. But we're more lovable odd than like crazy, be afraid of us odd. Don't be afraid to ask for help. 9 times out of 10, it's going to work out. And on the positive side, sleep. Don't pull all-nighters. You're going to do better fully rested with 2 hours of studying than you're going to be if you got 2 hours of sleep and crammed for 6 hours. Your brain needs to shut down. Always plan to get there early. You don't want this to be the day where you get stuck in an accident. There's something beyond your control. Then all of a sudden you're panicking because you know you're going to make it to the classroom late and information is flying out of your brain like there's no tomorrow. So on those exam days, you remind them, you just got to prep. You get there on time or get there way early. That way, the crazy of others can't affect you. Take a deep breath. No one's going to die because of this. Positive self-talk. Build your confidence. You can sort of talk yourself up a little bit into doing better. More importantly, don't talk yourself down. Maybe that's the better way to actually think about this. I've seen people talk themselves out of doing well. I'm just not good at X. And then they don't do it. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Reminder students, let it go. Focus on what they're good at. Talk themselves up. Pace yourself. You've got your hour and 15 minutes. And by the way, take the entire, like I said before, take the hour and 15 minutes that you have. It's okay to be that person who's sitting there in there 30 minutes after everyone else left. And then answer every question. Never leave points on the board. You never know what you're going to get. Multiple choice, 1 in 4 chance you got it. And on a short answer identification or essay, we can find merit in anything. May not be a lot, but we can find merit in anything. So these are the things I remind my students of, and God willing, they remember some of it, and it actually helps them on their exams. Do you have any questions?
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you, everybody, so much for being here. And again, we will upload this to the YouTube channel, and the resources will be put in Blackboard by the end of the day. Thank you and have a great day. Bye.
Hey, Amy, can I ask you something real quick?
Yes, let me stop this recording first.
Okay.
Let's see. Stop recording. Yes.